Well, it's official. Big Tech is officially controlling what you see, and they're not even being shy about it anymore. Viva Fry, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and this story is just all over the place. If you are not familiar with this story, you must not be on any form of social media whatsoever. Twitter and Facebook censoring, or at the very least restricting, access to a New York Post bombshell of an expose about Hunter Biden, emails found on a computer that he brought to a laptop repair shop that he didn't bother to pick up. Now, I am not going over that story in this vlog. It is not the purpose of my vlogs. You can read about it on the internet, and what just blows my mind is that social media tech companies have not yet understood the full force of the Streisand effect. And although I think I've mentioned it in one of my previous vlogs, for those of you who don't know the origins of the Streisand effect, it stems from a lawsuit that Barbra Streisand took against an aerial photographer who took a picture of her Malibu property and put it on the internet. Before having taken the lawsuit, the picture was downloaded something like less than 10 times. A few of those times were by Barbra Streisand's own attorneys. After she filed the lawsuit, the picture was downloaded something like 400,000 times.
Hence the Streisand effect.
It seems that for all their attempts to suppress the story, all that Jack, Twitter, Facebook, and Zuckerberg have done is amplify the story. I don't know if it is Orwellian or Kafkaesque or a combination between the two, but the New York Post or someone working at the New York Post actually posted a tweet that I couldn't subsequently find to the effect that they could not publish their own article on Twitter. And not only was Twitter not allowing the link to be shared, apparently they were also suspending accounts for tweeting the story. Twitter CEO admits handling of blocked Post article was, quote, unacceptable. In a tweet from Jack, our communication around our actions on the New York Post article was not great, and blocking URL sharing via tweet or DM with zero context as to why we're blocking it, unacceptable. To which I responded with what I think is an undumb thing on Twitter, which reads as follows.
Ooh, let me have some of that Cool Whip. You're saying it weird. Why are you putting so much emphasis on the H? What are you talking about? I'm just saying it. Cool Whip.
Nothing more disingenuous than, quote, correcting a, quote, mistake once the damage has already been done, Jack. Except in this case, the damage was the Streisand effect resulting from the failure to properly implement the plan from the get-go. Section 230 CDA reform coming soon. And when I say that I'm not going over the story, it's because it's not what my channel is about, but there is a very interesting backdrop to this entire situation resulting from an opinion or a statement Judge Clarence Thomas just made at the Supreme Court the other day. In denying a petition for writ of certiorari, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, I've always had trouble with that word.
Certiorari.
Justice Thomas reflected on how it might be time to revise Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which I also pointed out on Twitter in what I hope is another undumb tweet. Clarence Thomas also just issued an opinion that it might be time to review Section 230 CDA immunity. If Twitter, Jack, Facebook, Finked, al want to play, quote, editor of town square with overt election interference, they should bear the correlative legal exposure. Now, it is true, and one has to bear this in mind throughout this vlog, that the opinion issued by Justice Thomas in his statement denying the petition for writ of certiorari, it is not a binding opinion, but it is nonetheless persuasive. And I suspect it will be cited in the next petition for writ of certiorari in a lawsuit pertaining to Section 230 immunity. And although non-binding, it does give some good insight into the thinking or direction of the SCOTUS, and it also gives a good history and understanding of Section 230 immunity and the problems with it. The petition for a writ of certiorari is denied. Statement of Justice Thomas respecting the denial of certiorari. This petition asks us to interpret a provision commonly called Section 230, a federal law enacted in 1996 that gives internet platforms immunity from some civil and criminal claims. When Congress enacted the statute, most of today's major internet platforms did not exist. And in the 24 years since, we have never interpreted this provision. But many courts have construed the law broadly to confer sweeping immunity on some of the largest companies in the world. Justice Thomas then briefly describes the underlying lawsuit. We're not going to get into the weeds of it. Suffice to say that it was filed by a company called Enigma Software versus another company called Malwarebytes. These two companies are competitors in the malware industry, where they provide a service that blocks malicious or dangerous stuff from your computer. Enigma sued Malwarebytes on the basis that Malwarebytes was actually blocking Enigma from showing up, thus they were engaging in anti-competitive conduct, and Malwarebytes tried invoking Section 230 immunity. Malwarebytes was ultimately denied Section 230 immunity, and they filed a petition for writ of certiorari, which was ultimately denied, but Justice Thomas had some comments to make. And although Justice Thomas agrees in denying the writ, he nonetheless feels that the court should address the question when a proper court case arises. I agree with the court's decision not to take up this case. I write to explain explain why, in an appropriate case, we should consider whether the text of this increasingly important statute aligns with the current state of immunity enjoyed by internet platforms. Justice Thomas then provides a brief legal backdrop history to the statute. Enacted at the dawn of the .com era, Section 230 contains two subsections that protect computer service providers from some civil and criminal claims. The first is definitional. It states, quote, "No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider." This provision ensures that a company, like an email provider, can host and transmit third-party content without subjecting itself to the liability that sometimes attaches to the publisher or speaker of unlawful content. The second subsection provides direct immunity from some civil liability. It states that no computer service provider, quote, "shall be held liable for A, good faith acts to restrict access to or remove certain types of objectionable content, or B, giving consumers tools to filter the same types of content." This limited protection enables companies to create community guidelines and remove harmful conduct without worrying about legal reprisal. This provision of law creates a distinction between the platform and the publisher. Publishers can be held liable for things they publish because they exercise editorial discretion over what they publish, whereas platforms don't, they didn't, and people didn't want them to be held responsible because it would have killed the birth of the internet. And how this provision of law came to see the light of day makes even more sense in light of the context. The year before Congress enacted Section 230, one court blurred this distinction. An early internet company was sued for failing to take down defamatory content posted by an unidentified commenter on a message board. The company contended that it merely distributed the defamatory statement, but the company had also held itself out as a family-friendly service provider that moderated and took down offensive content. The court determined that the company's decision to exercise editorial control over some content, quote, rendered it a publisher, even for content it merely distributed. Stratton Oakmont, 1995. This in comparison to another lawsuit where the internet service provider got off free because they made no attempts to moderate the content, and in so making no attempts to moderate the content were not held responsible for that content. And so here we see that a company was actually penalized for attempting to moderate unlawful content, which was sort of counterproductive and counterintuitive. Taken at face value, Section 230C alters the Stratton Oakmont rule in two respects. First, Section 230C1 indicates that an internet provider does not become the publisher of a piece of third-party content and thus subject to strict liability simply by hosting or distributing that content. Second, Section 230C2A provides an additional degree of immunity when companies take down or restrict access to objectionable content so long as the company acts in good faith. In short, the statute suggests that if a company unknowingly leaves up illegal third-party content, it is protected from publisher liability by Section 230C1, and if it takes down certain third-party content in good faith, it is protected by Section 230C2A. Justice Thomas then goes on to describe the problem in how the courts have interpreted this provision of law to basically give total immunity to all online platforms for pretty much anything they do online, and we are now seeing firsthand the problems resulting from that. This modest understanding is a far cry from what has prevailed in court, adopting the too common practice of reading extra immunity into statutes where it does not belong. Citing his own dissenting opinion, courts have relied on policy and purpose arguments to grant sweeping protection to internet platforms. Courts have extended the immunity in Section 230 far beyond anything that plausibly could have been intended by Congress. I address several areas of concern. Justice Thomas first addresses the publisher versus distributor concerns. Courts have discarded the long-standing distinction between, quote, publisher liability and, quote, distributor liability. Although the text of Section 230C1 grants immunity only from, quote, publisher or, quote, speaker liability, the first appellate court to consider the statute held that it eliminates distributor liability too. That is, Section 230 confers immunity even when a company distributes content that it knows is illegal. To be sure, recognizing some overlap between publishers and distributors is not unheard of. Sources sometimes use language that arguably blurs the distinction between publishers and distributors. One source respectively refers to them as, quote, primary publishers and, quote, secondary publishers or disseminators, explaining that distributors can be, quote, charged with publication. Yet there are good reasons to question this interpretation. Justice Thomas then goes on to raise 3 points that are problematic in terms of how the courts have interpreted that provision of law versus what Congress intended with that provision of law. First, Congress expressly imposed distributor liability in the very same act that included Section 230. Section 502 of the Communications Decency Act makes it a crime to, quote, knowingly display obscene material to children, even if a third party created that content. This section is enforceable by civil remedy. It is odd to hold, as courts have, that Congress implicitly eliminated distributor liability in the very act in which Congress explicitly imposed it. Second, Congress enacted Section 230 just 1 year after Stratmont Oak used the terms, quote, publisher and, quote, distributor instead of, quote, primary publisher and, quote, secondary publisher. If, as courts suggest, Stratton Oakmont was the legal backdrop on which Congress legislated, one might expect Congress to use the same term Stratton Oakmont used. Third, had Congress wanted to eliminate both publisher and distributor liability, it could have simply created a categorical immunity in Section 230C1. No provider, quote, shall be held liable for information provided by a third party. After all, it used the exact categorical language in the very next subsection, which governs removal of content. Where Congress uses a particular phrase in one subsection and a different phrase in another, we ordinarily presume that the difference is meaningful. But coming back to the beginning of this vlog and the reason for doing this vlog, the issue is not when big tech companies like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. leave content up. The issue is when they deliberately take it down and censor content. And when they do so, they seemingly do so with both impunity and immunity under Section 230 CDA. And later in his statement, Justice Thomas addresses that specific question. The decisions that broadly interpret Section 230 C1 to protect traditional publisher functions also eviscerated the narrow liability shield Congress included in the statute. Section 230 C2A encourages companies to create content guidelines and protects those companies that, quote, in good faith restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, end quote. Taken together, both provisions in Section 230C most naturally read to protect companies when they unknowingly decline to exercise editorial functions to edit or remove third-party content, Section 230C1, and when they decide to exercise those editorial functions in good faith, Section 230C2A. But by construing Section 230C1 to protect any decision to edit or remove content, courts have curtailed the limits Congress placed on decisions to remove content. See eVentures Worldwide LLC versus Google Inc., rejecting the interpretation that Section 230C1 protects removal decisions because it would, quote, swallow the more specific immunity in C2. With no limits on an internet company's discretion to take down material, Section 230 now apparently protects companies who racially discriminate in removing content. The counter-argument to reducing the immunity provided for or interpreted into Section 230 is obviously that it would cripple the internet, it would put all of these big companies at risk, they would get sued into oblivion, it would create exposure that they would not be able to deal with. And Justice Thomas gives us an indication as to his thinking on that particular concern. Paring back the sweeping immunity courts have read into Section 230 would not necessarily render defendants liable for online misconduct. It would simply give plaintiffs a chance to raise their claims in the first place. Plaintiffs must still prove the merits of their cases, and some claims will undoubtedly fail. Moreover, states and the federal government are free to update their liability laws to make them more appropriate for an internet-driven society. Extending Section 230 immunity beyond the natural reading of the text can have serious consequences. Before giving companies immunity from civil claims for, quote, knowingly hosting illegal CP or for race discrimination, we should be certain that is what the law demands. Without the benefit of a briefing on the merits, we need not decide today the correct interpretation of Section 230. But in an appropriate case, it behooves us to do so. And bringing this back to the beginning yet again, the question that we are asking in this particular case, and that a lot of us have been asking for a long time on the internet, is at what point do these platforms cease being platforms through their conduct and begin being publishers? At what point do they exercise sufficient editorial control in what they allow and what they specifically remove that they should lose the immunity provided to them under Section 230 if that section ever provided that immunity in the first place? And the Hunter Biden story is just the perfect and most recent example of that. Breaking: Twitter has blocked the New York Post article about Hunter Biden. If you are attempting to share the story, you will see this message. Quote, we can't complete this request because this link has been identified by Twitter or our partners as being potentially harmful, end quote. According to James O'Keefe, breaking: Jack has locked down Real James Woods. The censorship is out of control. Hi James Woods, your account at Real James Woods has been locked for violating the Twitter rules. Specifically for violating our rules against distribution of hacked material. We don't permit the use of our services to directly distribute content obtained through hacking that contains private information, may put people in physical harm or danger, or contains trade secrets. On the issue of good faith conduct and editorializing, it then becomes a question of whether or not they are applying the rules fairly or in a manner that suggests editorializing and not just rule enforcement. And I'm not thinking of any Trump tax story in particular that was based on illegally leaked or obtained tax information. I'm not talking about that.
I'm just asking the question at large.
And just to end with the ultimate irony of the entire situation and the Streisand effect in its purest form, a tweet from Robbie Suave. In censoring the New York Post story, platforms ensured it would get even more attention, distracted from the reporting's issues, made themselves look like hypocrites, and probably emboldened the pro-tech regulation faction within the GOP. Nice work, geniuses. That, and you know, it may very well qualify as bona fide election interference. My humble opinion has always been that censorship does not work. You cannot keep the truth in darkness, and dumb ideas deserve to see the light of day as well. And with that said, if you like my videos, you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm.
Feed me all night long.
If you want to support the channel, all of these support links are in the pinned comment. We've got PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar, YouTube membership. We've got merch. Politics ruins everything, but more important than any of that, take care of yourselves, check in on friends and family, make sure everyone around you is doing well, and now you know your vlog. Peace out. Yeah.